You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
Welcome to the 2016 Iowa City Book Festival, presented by Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. We would like to thank the sponsors who made this event possible. The sponsors are the City of Iowa City, right here, the University of Iowa, right there, the Iowa Arts Council, no doubt somewhere close, Sheraton, Iowa City Public Library, the Iowa City Coralville Convention and Visitor Bureau, and Iowa Tourism. Today, as part of the panel discussion on Pics or It Didn't Happen, we will hear from Zhu Jianing, Ruel Johnson, Khaled Kamisi, Hilary Plum, and Anais Duplan, not necessarily in that order, who will discuss issues of transparency, information access, and privacy as they relate to writing. It will be moderated by myself, Natasha Duravichova. Let me read you, before I read the biographies, let me actually read the description of the panel, because I think we're deeming that the poetic nature of the title may have thrown some potential audiences here. So, the description of the panel as it was originally submitted is as follows. The true privilege of today's world is the right to be forgotten. What has then become of the earlier centuries' struggles for transparency, public access, information without limits? Has our wish been granted? That is, that we have total access and total information without limits. And how can fiction contend with and respond to and work through this glut of data, images, and information? How can we digest and react to the events of our time when commentary is instantaneous? So it really has to do with this total 24/7 continuous stream of data that blankets all events, okay? So I think to honor the requests of the panelists, we're going to switch the order a little bit, and we're going to go with, I think we've nominated Ruel, perhaps, to be the lead. We're going to go with Ruel Johnson, who is a fiction writer and poet from Guyana. In 2002, his Ariadne and Other Stories won the Guyana Prize for Literature for Best First Book Collection. The collection Fictions won later the same award. A cultural advisor to the government of Guyana, Johnson is involved in policy development and implementation. Following him, we'll have Hilary Plum, who is the co-editor of the Open Prose series at Rescue Press and serves as the managing editor of the Journal of the History of Ideas. Her new book is Watchfires. Following that, we'll have Khaled Al-Khamisi, who is the Egyptian founder and president of the Quena Storytelling Festival and the Mansoura Literary Festival. His 2007 collection, Taxi Cabby Talk, has been translated into 21 languages, including English. His novel Noah's Ark appeared in 2009 and was followed in 2014 by the non-fiction volume 2011. Following him will come Anais Duplan, who is the director of a performance collective called the Spacesuits and of the Center for Afrofuturist Studies, an artist residency program in Iowa City. Her latest work is Take the Stallion, a collection of poems. And finally, as per her request, we will hear from Zhu Jianing, who is a fiction writer and translator in China. She's published 7 novels and 2 short story collections, as well as a Chinese translation of major English language writers such as O'Connor and J. Scarlett Oates. Her most recent novel, In the Woods, was published in 2014. Please, take it away. So.
All right, well, this huge audience. I think people would have seen the flyer and then chose to be forgotten by never attending. But all right, I want to start off by asking if anybody knows the name Bambi Woods.
Any what word?
Anybody knows the name Bambi Woods? I'm sort of disappointed in you 3 gentlemen, by the way. All right, Bambi Woods was the star of probably the most second. Sorry, I had no coffee. The second most famous porn movie of the golden age of porn, in the 1970s. Debbie Does Dallas. This is somebody who achieved fame on a global level. After Debbie Does Dallas, I think she did one other movie and an interview, and then she disappeared completely. She's been the subject of several documentaries, including one on the BBC, speculating about her whereabouts, etc. I guess the question is, and after she made the first movie, she didn't expect it to get that sort of global response. So she was a very private person, so she retreated, and very successfully that. The question is whether that sort of conscious anonymity is possible today with media and how invasive both media in the mainstream way as well as media in the tool of both unofficial and official entities that are seeking to collect data. So you have, for example, hackers groups that are basically harvesting private data for illicit gain, and then you have, in the interest of national security, patriotism, you have the National Security Act, the Patriot Act, sorry, which harvests data about persons, etc. So for me, it's doubtful whether Bambi Woods could today pull the sort of disappearing act she did subsequent to Debbie Does Dallas. Now, the question of anonymity is, of course, linked to the entire issue of two issues. One, privacy in the first place, and then, I guess, the capacity for memory. I find a lot of the concerns that I sort of grapple with as a writer today can be found in the works of Jorge Luis Borges. And I want to read a very small passage from something he, a story well, not aptly, but coincidentally calls The Witness. And let me look for it.
You're fine.
I'm sorry, I just stuck with notes right now. Anyway, I think I can remember much of it from memory. But the story starts off by describing an old Saxon man who is dying in a woodshed near a church at the advent of the rise of Christianity in England. And Borges says that when this old Saxon dies, certain memories die with him. And the question he puts is, the thesis he puts forward is that something or an infinite number of things dies in every death, unless the universe is possessed of a memory. And then he questions, what are the things that are going to die with him when he dies? The image of a lone horse at a corner in Buenos Aires, the image of a desk, a block of sulfur in his desk, or the voice of a friend of his called Macedonio Fernandez. Today, our universe has sort of become possessed of memory. Almost everything we do that is substantial finds some sort of recording or some sort of imprint that is reproducible. And writers have been increasingly dealing with this issue. There's a story called by a brilliant sci-fi writer called Ted Chiang. And the story again slips me, but it is essentially a world in which technology is able to record and everything that you do, so that people can, if you have an argument with your spouse, you could bring it up back and say, you know, this is the context in which this happened, etc. When it comes to anonymity and writing, that is a sort of a complex thing. Can a writer truly be anonymous in the sense that you might have a body of text and then you have your person, and what's the body of text? And again, Borges sort of dealt with that in a story called Borges y Yo, in which he tries to make a distinction between Borges, the writer, who has a certain reputation and who has won certain awards, and Borges, the very quotidian citizen or person, very inward-looking, introspective person. And that there's a sort of a dichotomy, an uneasy dichotomy between the two. And one will eventually subsume the other. And he ends that particular piece with says, I don't know which of us is writing this page. Recently, in the news, there's been this story of, and I don't know if anybody knows Banksy. You know the artist Banksy, and there was speculation about whether who the person is, etc. Apparently, there's been a sort of literary equivalent of Banksy, but less controversial, etc. The name is Elena Ferrata.
Yeah.
And I think her identity was recently discovered. When it comes to, and she's made some very eloquent arguments about the need for anonymity as a writer from a personal perspective, but I guess which can be applied. The issue of the right to be forgotten for me, has two dimensions. One, I guess, is a moral dimension, and the other one is a legal one. A legal perspective, I think it's currently going on in Europe. The right to be forgotten is being debated, legislated somewhat. And it has more to do with, if it is that I do something and say I'm exonerated, that my record should be expunged. So I guess it's a partial right to anonymity, or to be forgotten, or specific acts that you've done to be forgotten. And I've seen it being applied here a bit unethically with regard to a local police force in the commissioner advising police officers that if it is that they have been they've been charged with cited for rights violations, etc. If it is that they are exonerated, which is a touchy thing because the rate of exoneration is extremely high, perhaps unrealistically high. If it is they are exonerated, there are ways in which they can expunge their record. And that prevents a narrative of analysis of both the legal as well as the ethical dimensions of the right to be forgotten or the right of specific acts to be forgotten. For me, generally the issue has to do with the concept of citizenship and how much of our citizenship we want to relinquish. The right to be, some of our fundamental human rights have the right to have a name, the right for citizenship, the right to have an identity. Now, if it is that you choose the supposed right to be forgotten, how many of those rights that you own are you deliberately relinquishing? Finally, the whole issue of the right to be forgotten. I guess the only way you can avoid being remembered is probably to not exist at all. But even so, in today, because of digital media, that poses certain challenges. My Wikipedia entry, which I did write, is about this long. There's another writer called Anthony Godby Johnson, whose is about 5 times the length of mine. Johnson never existed, but he is born in 1978. He has a history, and but he's supposedly a hoax, but his biographical details are related as if he might possibly exist. So you have
There's a fiction.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay,
All right.
moving on. And I think Hillary was second.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's nice to be here. Thank you. I didn't quite prepare a series of thoughts, but I think what I'll do is talk about how I've thought about some of these topics in my writing, and I hope that that will connect up with some of the larger ideas that Ruel already raised. I feel really echoey, but maybe that's okay. I published a novel in 2013 that was about a group of anti-war activists around the U.S. war in Iraq that started in 2003. And in the novel, these activists undertake a series of small-scale bombings. So it's a sort of vision of a weather underground, right? Transplanted into 2000, into the mid-2000s. And at the time, so the novel is really thinking about kind of that act of reading news from elsewhere, as one might say. And for me was a kind of continued practice of attention to a war that disappeared very quickly from the U.S. news, right? It sort of didn't remain in the papers here. It was waged, right, in a way where only 1% of the population was serving. People were continually sent back there. And the nation seemed as a whole fairly disinterested in a war that it had very consciously started. So that was a way of thinking about kind of trying to make attention exist where attention didn't exist. It was also thinking about this question of information and manipulation, since at the start of that war, the fact, right, that it was being launched for false reasons was perfectly well known everywhere, and yet that didn't seem to matter, right? So the information didn't result in any action. It was kind of, powerless in that way. Everyone could see that the sort of narrative that was being given as a reason to start it was false, but it made no difference at all. So those kinds of questions about how does information matter and who's kind of attending to it, right, were part of that novel. And I think kind of hook up with some of the things that Raoul was talking about with the reasons that activism like that doesn't exist today or couldn't exist today in the same way with the type of, surveillance that exists. And that was something I was interested in thinking about. Why is this a sort of kind of a violence and a form of engagement that existed at one time and no longer does in the same way? And I was also, there's lots. I was sort of thinking too about this gap between generations. My generation and we all start with sort of our own orientation to our families, et cetera, versus my parents who protested the war in Vietnam, and thinking about how here the narrative of the war in Vietnam is the first war that took place in people's living rooms, right? Because of the media coverage allowed everyday people to really witness what was happening, and that was one reason that the culture became so profoundly involved in the war. Obviously, that's perfectly true for the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. People could witness them all day, every day if they wanted to, but they didn't. So it was a war that could take place in your living room, but people just excluded it from their living rooms, and that was sort of that. So that first book was thinking about that. And then, that came out, and a few years later, my second book is a memoir that just came out. It actually hasn't come out yet. That was a lie. Whatever. My husband has had cancer for a number of years, and one of his first cancer surgeries took place in the spring of 2013, kind of right after there was that bombing at the Boston Marathon. And I grew up in New England, and the Boston Marathon, I'd kind of run pieces of it or been around it a long time. And so the day that he was having this surgery, I was sitting in this waiting room in rural Pennsylvania, and that it was just like C-SPAN, or not it was on all day, and it was just this hunt for the younger brother of the two bombers. So there was sort of this very powerful metaphorical resonance right between this hunt through the body for the tumor and this kind of hunt through the city for this terrorist that was happening, and sort of both those things took all day. And so I started in that moment and was thinking about the sort of metaphors of illness that we use politically, and how those are mobilized politically, and thinking about terrorism being referred to as a cancer, and then as an autoimmune disease, as it often kind of becomes. So this question of the self and the other in the body, and in the body politic, right? So who belongs, and that becomes a question about, citizenship, as Ruel was mentioning, and about surveillance, right? This kind of continual surveilling for what is normal behavior, or what is the behavior that belongs in the body, and how we're going to intervene in that or separate kind of self from other. And in that book is also sort of thinking about, all of that involves kind of as a writer, what you're doing is you're like sitting in your house, just kind of reading news in an obsessive, continual way. So it's also trying to think about that act, what that kind of the ethics of that reading is, or how that witnessing, is that a type of action? If it is, what type of action is it? How is it kind of caught up in the ideas of surveillance that it's trying to think about? So those are some of the questions that those books were kind of taking on.
Okay, great, thank you. Colin?
Good morning. And I'm Khaled Al-Khamisi. I'm a novelist from Cairo, Egypt. I will begin by a story. During my flight from Cairo to Iowa City, I met a very beautiful family. It's a man and a woman and a child. And both of them had plenty of books with them. And the child, she was maybe 3 years old, and she had at least 5, 6 books with her. And I was really happy seeing all these books with them. And after maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 hours of flight, I asked them from where they are. They told me they are Austrians. And per coincidence, I was reading a book by Stephen Zweig that I liked him very much. I read many, many books of him. And my grandfather in the 40s translate a book from him called Ermia. And it is a very interesting translation because it was translation from poetry to poetry. Then I said to them, look, I'm reading now a novelist by an Austrian. He is Stephen Zweig. And both of them, they never heard the name of Stephen Zweig before. And I was really shocked, astonished, how 2 Austrians with all these books with them never heard the name of Stephen Zweig. And I tried to understand how they couldn't know about them. And I thought in the plane that many people from this generation, they were approximately in the 30s, maybe late 30s. The world for them began maybe in 2000. Anything happened before 2000 doesn't exist. And why? I said to myself in the plane also that maybe because of this flow of information of every day, these flow of information take a lot of space in their brains. And this is for what they are not interested to know what happened during all the history. Then I began to think this flow is for whom and by whom. And it was a question that we were discussed in a conference in England with many professors of literature and poets and novelists about who make this flow of information, who write this flow of information, and who read this flow of information. And we have here 2 positioning, very clear positioning. Some say that it is a very positive thing that we today have a novels, and this novel it's sold by 1 million copy. It was impossible in 60, 70 years. A novelist from Egypt, for example, his name is Naguib Mahfouz. He is a Nobel Prize. During all his life, when a novel from him sold 3,000 copy, 4,000 copy, he is extremely happy. The network who reads, there are approximately this amount of people, 4,000, 5,000 persons. And the same if we think about any English, French novelist during the 19th century and the beginning of 20th century. The numbers were 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 in maximum. The last years, the number increased a lot. We became to speak about millions of copies of some writers. Why? Who are these millions of people buying books? And then I will begin by these two positioning. The first position, that this is a catastrophe because the quality of writing is extremely bad, and 90% of the population of the world are almost illiterate and are almost not interested really about intellectual ideas, and they are mainly interested about things extremely low profile, about sex, about food, about etc. And what the people who are writing this flow of information or the flow of poetry, etc., they are writing extremely bad quality of writing. And I remember a professor in Oxford, he's a poet, he said that he want to imprison himself in his room and to put a pillow on his head to not see this catastrophe of poetry everywhere. And for him, this is we are living in a nightmare, in a big nightmare. And the problem that this, between brackets, I will use the word shit because my English is not enough to find a proper word not good.
You found the right word.
Sorry?
You found the right word.
Okay. Then this shit is the norm of the flow of writing everywhere. And who is reading this poetry and short stories, etc.? People are not intellectual at all. The other side of the story, this is my opinion personally, this is a very positive thing, because if I take Cairo, for example, as an example, we had, what I can say, alternative press, alternative poetry, alternative novelists, etc. And these, between brackets, alternative writings were extremely important for the development of ideas in Egypt, because the mainstream, unfortunately, were totally related to power, to political power, were totally related to the la bénédiction, the
Blessing.
sorry?
Blessing.
The blessing of the government, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Culture, etc. But we needed in Egypt some people, some writers, they are not under the blessing of the government. And for the press, the same thing exactly. And this has happened in Egypt, that we had a good alternative movements that make fresh ideas in Egypt. But we have also the same problem, that yes, for 90% of the population, world doesn't exist before the 21st century. And yes, the quality of writing generally is extremely bad. I think we have to position ourselves what we will do in this dilemma. We are with this flow of extremely bad writing to have 1% good of writing, or it is a catastrophe like the professor of Oxford spoke in England. Unfortunately, I don't, this is a conclusion, and maybe after I will develop if I have time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Anais? Yeah.
Well, I guess I entered this thought about transparency and visibility by thinking about my own autobiography. I was born in Haiti, and when I was 3, there was political turmoil, as is often the case in Haiti. And with my mother, I came to this country, and then I was a permanent resident alien for much of my life, and last summer I was, quote unquote, naturalized. I think about that trajectory a lot, from going to a country where I was, in a sense, invisible, in the sense of being, looking like everyone else there. Then coming to this country and being given kind of a paradoxical title, in my mind, a permanent resident alien. And I spent much of my life sort of trying to figure out what that meant for me and my own engagement and my own sort of sense of citizenship. Ruel brought up this word of citizenship, and it's something that I think about a lot. As something which is not always chosen, right? You have the citizenship that you are born with, and you might, through a series of transformations or travelings, end up a citizen of another entity, a nation. But also I think of citizenship in terms of one's own politics or who one chooses to align oneself with. The sort of politics of your friends and family, who you are around on a daily basis. I think about visibility a lot as a person of color, so to speak, with white yarn on my head. I'm a very recognizable person, which sort of presents me with kind of an issue in that I'm a hermit. I don't really like to talk. This is terrifying for me. But that you don't really have to decide that you have a relationship to something for it to affect you. In the body that I'm in, there are certain ideas that others might have about who I am as a, again, person of color, which I always kind of want to bracket, right? Because there are certain places in the world where I'm not a person of color or where this term might carry no validity. I think about this also in terms of the question about whether anonymity in the present day is still possible. And I think one sort of level of nuance or detail that I want to add is it's not necessarily so that because we have such a, I believe the term, glut of data, right? And this sense of hypervisibility, that anonymity is sort of gone with the wind. 23% of the world's population is on Facebook, right? That's kind of a large nation in itself, and an interesting place to think about citizenship. There are ways to engage with Facebook, to be on Facebook, that are just as subversive, I would say, as to be a writer without identity or without public identity. And there are things that people are doing in the present day and age to kind of enable that way of existing inside what is otherwise a very hypervisible sphere. I've also been thinking about a quote by the poet Amiri Baraka, and the quote is, "New black music is this. Find the self, then kill it." And I love to think about this as, I mean, Baraka was talking about jazz, right, specifically. as a process of coming into oneself, and then also a process of casting off that self or killing it. And the active process of killing it, which is to say, to break through, to break through your repertoire of self, in a way, right? What you understand yourself and also your citizenship to be. I think that writing is a space where these kind of subversive actions, these kinds of citizenship on the one hand, but anti or non-citizenship on the other hand, can happen. We can sort of implant the field of writing with both an aspiring to find the self, but also a kind of rigorous intention to kill it.
Okay.
Yeah, hello everybody. When I first got this topic, actually I prepared. And then this morning I talked with my friends. Then my friend told me that I'm totally wrong with this topic. I'm totally misunderstanding it. And they tell me that I have to say something about there's an American writer called Kurt, how to say his name? Kurt Vonnegut.
Vonnegut.
Yes. Because he put some drawings in his novels. And I should talk about this kind of things, but I have never read him before, so I cannot do that. And also there's a Chinese artist who is very famous in America, I think. His name is Xu Bing. Yes, he also finished short stories with just a symbol. Yes. So they told me that I should say something like that. This is a picture of something like that, yeah. But I prepared something, but it's totally wrong. And I think, the language is not, how to say, writing cannot give any certainty. But pictures can give certainty. If this topic is in a picture, I cannot misunderstand it at all. But certainty is the real truth or not. This is a very big question, because the topic is a picture, or it didn't happen. It's something. It's something like that. But if we really have the picture here, we can see this picture. But the picture, they may be like photoshopped, and it cannot be the truth. Because I know there's a news photography prize called a WordPress photo. I think it's a big prize, but it's a big prize, yeah. But now every year when they want to decide who is the winner, they have to ask some experts to check if this photo is real or it's a fake photo, because people can use Photoshop a lot to change the reality. Yeah, something like that. So anyway, I still want to say something that I prepared. Yes, because if I misunderstood this topic and then I say something, then the people here, they may understand my talk again, and then it will be related to this topic again. Yes. What I want to say is there's a Chinese science fiction novel called Three Body. Whenever other people from other countries ask me to recommend them Chinese contemporary literature, this is my only choice. Yes, this book is very good, and I think the English translation version is even better, because it is translated by Kan Liu, who is also a science fiction writer and who also won this Hugo Prize. It is the right Hugo Prize. Hugo. And also this Three Body also won this Hugo Prize. And the writer's name is Liu Cixin, and in this novel, Liu Cixin, sorry, I have to read something. Yes, in this novel, Liu Cixin developed a wall phaser plan. This wall phaser plan is the only a plausible way for human beings to prevent aliens attack by taking advantage of the weakness of these aliens. Namely, they cannot hide what they are thinking of. And these aliens can understand the human beings' language, they can read all the books, and they have this access to all information on computers, but they cannot detect human beings' thoughts. So in order to gain strategic advantage, human beings select 4 war phaser. The war phasers do not have to reveal any plans to anyone in the world. They can take advantage of a huge amount of resources to help themselves to carry out their plans without explaining why, unless the resources they request exceed what they can possibly have or would cause significant damage to human beings. Those war phasers have to bear the most difficult responsibility in human history. They have to close their minds to the entire world and even to the entire universe. They are true loners. The only people they can possibly communicate to and depend on are themselves. They have to spend a long time with the great mission. And to me, writing in this information exploding era is just like this situation. Sometimes I feel myself, I'm just like this war facer kind of people. And also this writer, when he wrote this novel, he was an engineer of a power station, which is in a mountain. So he is very lonely. He cannot talk to other people, and all these things just happen in his mind. It is not related to any outside world, those information flows or something like that. Yes, this is what I want to say.
Well, it wasn't so far off after all.
Yeah, friends around.
So either, I prefer to open it up, yeah?
Yeah.
You? Okay, and actually, can you ask that into the microphone so we can?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't. There are so many ironies in this panel, sitting in the city council chambers of city government with
5 HD cameras and two security cameras.
absolutely.
Pardon.
So I wanted to ask a little bit more about subversion and pranks. I was reading recently a novel by a French-Egyptian writer named, I want to say Alfred Kossery is his name, and it's basically about subverting a government, subverting the Alexandrian governor by posting pictures of him around town with a lot of praise for it, and they basically take the government down by praising it to death. And it seems like a mid-century version. So I'd like to hear more about tactics for subversion in this age.
If I may, because the current current text I'm working on is a screenplay that sort of converges a lot of what has been said today. For example, seeking out, government seeking out the cancer in the body politic, which has to do with, if it is that we are vessels of information and certain mimetic memory and practices, etc., and we exist in societies in which there is the capacity for subversion, increasingly multiplied by the power of mass media and the internet in particular. How do we maintain order, and who has the capacity to maintain order? Khaled, you mentioned, I think you touched upon it somewhat with regard to, first of all, I think in the 70s, the media existing to praise governments, etc. what you find today is a convergence of a couple of things. You have the convergence of private sector interests increasingly controlling and both the information that is presented and the politics of that information, whether it's Fox News, whether it's CNN, Huffington Post, etc. And you have a global consolidation of media along, I think, cultural and political fault lines. That's on one hand. Then you have the information age in which cultures can be affected or changed. You have which people can bring down political regimes using the internet, Twitter, as happened in the Arab Spring. And you have the consolidation of control, the corporate consolidation of control of these mass media things, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook. And you mentioned that Facebook can be a way of, you can anonymously sort of retreat into Facebook and choose how you control your privacy, etc.
I was saying that an anonymity on Facebook is possible, not necessarily through the controls that Facebook gives you, right?
Yeah, but why I'd counter and say is this, that true anonymity on Facebook is not possible in the sense that you may, the only way I think you can be truly anonymous on Facebook is to create an account and not use it at all. Because by virtue of the very things that you engage in, whether it's reading a news thing, etc., what it does is tracks all of those things. So it gathers data and it gets data on you. So it learns your pattern. So you read enough about the hurricane in Haiti, and it suggests natural disasters in the next few things. So essentially what you have is these systems learning in the control of a very few people. Then on the counter side of that, which is leads to what I'm working on, which is basically what happens if citizens or get access to that sort of power that you have a current conglomerate of Google, Facebook, and a couple other companies have now decided to come together and collectively go after artificial intelligence research, which is the next step. The current step is the ownership of this universal memory that I mentioned with Borges. The next step is ownership of what is essentially be artificial information labor. You essentially have a very small group of people controlling, if artificial intelligence, if you reach that sort of singularity, controlling the, I don't want to call them machines, but what will be effectively be consciousness that has the capacity to process vast amounts of information that would technically they have a patent on. And that is a tremendous amount of power concentrated in a very small space that could affect markets, could affect education, politics, culture. So inevitably, you will going to find that you will have subversive acts against that.
Can I trivially route this towards saying, how does fiction engage with this? Because I think you're completely right that the system itself is geared towards consolidation, and that's why singularity is such a popular or such a central concept in all of this. But at the same time, unless we agree that we are in the realm of singularity, we still somehow have to address this. And ultimately, I mean, one thinks about who can address this. Lawyers can address this, and writers, because lawyers can address it as a system of principles, and writers can address it as an imaginative way of thinking around the corners. And that's the reason why I think the topic sort of cannot help but be relevant, because somebody's got to be Afrofuturists got to think around this. I mean, the notion is the logic of the development is consolidation and monopoly, and the units are larger and larger all the time. So it's got to be from somehow a bottom-up imagination that comes up with propositions that can evolve into models.
Can I respond to that sort of and also in response to the Facebook point? So I agree, that one way to sort of escape the kind of gaze of
Or respond to it, because
Yeah.
escape is only one variant. It's not necessarily the only variant.
right, but one way to sort of escape or to procure a kind of anonymity, as Ruel says, is to sort of abstain from Facebook. But there is also, in thinking of what Hugh mentioned about irony, right, there is also a point to be made about a kind of contradictory presence. And my question sort of for the idea of anonymity is anonymity from whom,
Yeah.
We might think of being anonymous from our fellow social media users, but also, as Ruel very aptly brought up, the sort of machines and persons behind those machines who are tracking usage, right? In search of a kind of consolidation of information, right? And what this always brings me to is a book written by Fred Moten called The Undercommons, where he says, and he's talking about in this particular passage about the university, but I think it can be sort of brought into this conversation. He says, I'm paraphrasing, the only relationship to the university is a criminal one. What does he mean by that? He means that from inside the university, and what he's saying is not the only relationship, right, but the only, the one that we might aspire towards, right, is one where from inside the university, one is railing against, taking down, deconstructing, taking advantage of, criminalizing the university while still within it. What are the ways on Facebook to carry out a presence that is, in some sense, criminal? I think about several activist friends of mine who are often booted from Facebook or sort of bullied by Facebook to over and over prove their identity. My trans friends have this problem where Facebook has more ideas about their identity than, or different ideas about their identity than they might, right? And this poses a problem to what kind of presence they are allowed to carry out. But I think that irony is important, and contradiction. That it is possible to be present and be not present at the same time in a deliberate fashion. And that the only sort of recourse against this tendency toward the singularity or the monopoly is to continue to deliberately find the self, then kill it,
Now, I have a very quick question also. Is this flow of writings in the field of fiction, because if we have millions of people writing on internet, blogs, social network, etc., a percentage of these millions write some fiction writing. And this fiction writing, as I said, big percentage of it are written by non-professional. What happened that these writings influence professional writers. And these professional writers become gradually to write similar texts because they are a little bit influenced by the movement. It's a huge movement all over the world. And I know some important writers, their last 2-3 novels are really an imitation of the quality of writing of millions and millions of people who write in the internet. And when we speak with them, they said, this is the movement. We have to cope. We have to follow the movement. And my question then is this movement can asphyxia the literature world or not? This is a very, it's a very important question if I see only the Egyptian world, because finally I live in my environment and in my language. And I want also to, because he speaks about Albert Qusayri, I want to grab the possibility to tell all the people here that he is a really great novelist. and one of the most interesting novelists I know. And he is one of the novelists that you cannot take a word from the novels. Any novels, you can take a word or two words or a phrase. Some novels, you can take 50% of the novels and put it in the garbage, and the novel is still there. But in Albert Qusseiri, you cannot take one word. Then please read Albert Qusseiri. And finally, he's not French. In my knowledge, he never take the French nationality. He wrote in French language, but he is Egyptian. It's not important in any case.
We're kind of almost out of time, but I'd love to have one more question.
I'll try and be quick. So just think about the expectations of writers, especially if you, quote unquote, make it. In this age of social media, where you have to do world tours and you have to have a Twitter account and you have to make a YouTube for your novel, to be established, to basically pay, especially as a writer of novels, to basically sort of have that as your career. And I'm wondering, when you're thinking about what's possible in terms of what kind of audience, what kind of sales, can I do this as a career or not? What's possible and reasonable for yourselves? How do you sort of sort that out, if you might?
Yeah, maybe we can do a short survey here. Great.
All right. I say briefly, there always there's two movements that are going on. One is technological and one is cultural, and it impacts all over. And it goes back to, and I'll read a very brief passage here from this book called, which deals with a lot of these issues, called The Information by James Gleick. And he says, in 1943, the English mathematician and code breaker Alan Turing visited Bell Labs on a cryptographic mission and met Shannon, sometimes over lunch, where they traded speculation on the future of artificial thinking machines. Shannon wants to feed not just data to a brain, but cultural things, Turing exclaimed. He wants to play music to it. It's only about 60 to 70 years later now that we're seeing that sort of convergence of technology, information technology, and culture. And this is where movements like Afrofuturism, for example, will eventually, I think, take precedence, because it represents both the culture of the cultural focus, wherein you have to have the cultural competence eventually to have your memes or whatever present themes in your book reach as wide an audience as possible, in as effective a way as possible, and still be relevant.
Maybe we can hear from Hillary and Janine. We haven't had a chance to yet.
I guess I would think about sort of the relationship with readers, and maybe a friend of mine who's a novelist and a longtime editor named Peter Dimmick, who has a really beautiful novel that I also want to recommend called George Anderson, Notes for a Love Song in Imperial Time. Thinks a lot about the kind of digital reading versus the sort of traditional historical relationship with the book, and the privacy of that relationship, which occurs kind of outside of the market, right, outside of exchange. You purchase the book, but your experience of the book is private, and thinking about maybe this relationship between privacy and anonymity, as we've been talking about. And that privacy is changing with the reading online that we're discussing, right? When you read online, your attention is being monetized, right? Someone's tracking it. They're deciding how to sell you different things. It's becoming part of, sort of a vast amount of information that's being used for various purposes, so that you've lost some of the privacy of your relationship with the text. So that's sort of one question that's about kind of publishing, about maybe how reading literature in itself, in sort of maintaining the private relationship of the reader to the text, does it increasingly become subversive, when we were talking about that before? Also, I would think about in terms of the career, I don't really sell any books, so I don't, which is all right, but I think maybe that one way to think about that is what relationship you want to have with a reader, or you'd like your text to have. Are you on Twitter because you find the conversations on Twitter, right, to be engaging and maybe politically and aesthetically relevant, or because you're trying to sell books, right? Is it part of a exchange that's about that kind of that's oriented toward the book as a product that's, moving through a market, or about a conversation that you would like to have kind of privately with readers or potential readers or with other members of the culture. So,
Janine, do you want to say how are you online? Is your online presence strong?
Yes, I think the thing is that because in China we cannot use Facebook, we cannot use Google, we cannot use even Instagram. But I don't know if it is a good thing or not. Maybe it's a good thing that we cannot use Facebook, but we cannot use Google. This might not be a good thing, because I think Google Map is very useful for us. And for me, we have got some social media in China, but it's only in China. It's not like a worldwide social media. And on this social media, I never put my true name. I never use my true name in any social media. And for me, I've got a very good editor, so I do not need to sell my book by myself and say something about my book or say any opinion on my social media. I do not need to do that. I just put pictures and music and videos on my social media. It's for fun and something like that. I think opinion is a very private thing, and it should be a very complicated thing. If you can describe it in less than 100 words, then this is not a true opinion. But people, they are too eager to put their opinion on the internet. So eager. I hate this eagerness.
In the age of Twitter.
Yes.
Correct.
And I prefer to discuss my opinion just in my novel. If you want to know my real opinion, it's not that simple. I cannot describe it in less than 100 words. I prefer to write it in my novel, and then I can have more like perspective. Is this the right word?
Yeah.
Yes, and more like levels to discuss this opinion. But 100 words is too, how to say, it's not enough for me.
So
to
next
do that.
year we will have a panel on compression. This is great. Thank you very much. We've got to be done because there'll be more people coming in. Thank you so much. It was great. Thank you.